Hello, my friends. Welcome to Trending. Today is Thursday, February 16th. It's about 9:40 as we're recording this morning. Joe, good morning.
How's it going?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. It's cold. We got flurries here today. What's going on?
You just never know, man. It's
know.
60 to snow in a day. You just never know what to expect.
That's right. Well, here we are.
Here we are. All right. Well, so we kind of had a plan today. We're gonna adjust just a little bit. So we've been kind of talking about the whole Chat GPT thing, kind of on the side for the past few weeks. Continues to be a big deal. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are experimenting with it. And sometime soon, you and I are going to do kind of a deep dive on it.
Right.
You're doing some kind of research. You're doing some like kind of philosophical research, some of the spiritual implications. So
Yes.
I want to give you time to do that. And something else popped up that we want to talk about. So we'll do a deep dive into ChatGPT one of these days. But there's been some kind of things going on this week that you kind of mentioned that you wanted to talk about.
Right.
So people probably have heard about the whole Asbury revival thing. For people who maybe just are on the outskirts, kind of, they've heard about it, but they don't really know what's going on. Before we go too far, can you give us just a quick recap of what you know about it?
Yeah, so what we know so far is Asbury College, or it's Asbury University now, in Wilmore, Kentucky. It's across the street from Asbury Theological Seminary, kind of a well-known, historically United Methodist seminary. They have had with what participants are calling an awakening there. Simply put, I think a week ago yesterday, so a couple of Wednesdays ago, they had chapel service, which Christian colleges do. They have, we had to go at Sterling College. What was it, 14 mandatory chapels or something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
And they had this neat shot on that day of what chapel looked like at the end. Bunch of empty seats everywhere.
Yep.
And then mysteriously, students started coming back. They felt a sense they needed to come back. They wanted to pray and sing more. They wanted to seek God's face more. And so that meeting has gone around the clock for over a week now. Mm-hmm. And of course, now it's drawing interest from people all over the planet. So we've heard reports of people from New Zealand. I guess a pastor in Russia, Io was telling me she heard some of her contacts has been there. Some well-known evangelical figures, post-evangelical figures, other big names that you and I would probably recognize if we are attentive to what's going on in the Christian world have showed up. So reports are coming in. And so people are asking questions like, what's exactly going on there? Of course, the big question is this real and genuine, or is this something is this a little bit hype? And then ultimately, why do these sorts of things matter? Okay, and then why is it there at Asbury University, but maybe not other places who have been searching after something like this?
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to zoom back a little bit to even talk about what this phenomenon might be.
Yeah, great.
And then maybe talk about just on both sides of an event like this. And then obviously, we're not trying to have you we're not going to make up your mind for you. You're going to do your own research. You're going to make up your own mind. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, at Ridgepoint, because we're a larger church, diversity of thought, there's probably going to be people on either side of either a great openness to something like this or maybe some skepticism about something like this. Okay.
Yeah.
So simply put, in the topic of revivalism, it's kind of based on what we see a couple different times in the Bible, a couple different ideas about God's presence. Okay. So the scriptures would affirm that God's presence is everywhere. That little line from David in Psalm 139, I believe, where can I go from your presence? The highest heights you're there, the lowest of lows you're there. It might be Psalm 139, it might be Psalm 51, might be in both. But that general idea of God being everywhere, later as the church is dealing with Greco-Roman categories, they came up with this omnipresence of God, a category that one of the great early philosophers came up with. If there is a divine being, this divine being needs to be everywhere, so omnipresent. But then there have been these moments in biblical history where God's presence is saturated in a place, a tangible presence of God. We think of a place like when Solomon dedicates the temple in 2 Chronicles, and there's an awe and awareness of God, a presence, even a cloud of God's glory fills the temple, and the priests are so overwhelmed they have to back out of the temple. They just it's we can't survive if we last here. Or Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah himself is doing some temple errands, and God's presence draws near, and he's overwhelmed, right? You take a look at the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, or in a place like Acts chapter 8, or Acts chapter 10, or Acts chapter 19, where there's this nearness of God, manifestations of God's presence. And it's just unmistakable. Like there seems to be God's nearness is here. And so people throughout church history have looked at those occurrences in the Bible, and this is kind of this dynamic of God's omnipresence versus like a manifest presence.
Okay.
And there's been these seasons where there's been these reports, unusual things happen, where a church service extends for hours or days.
Yep.
Or there's like this great, percentage of repentance and conversions in a given area at a given time. So there's one revival from church history in the first decade of the 20th century, the Welsh revival during the preaching in and around Evan Roberts, where they saw like 100,000 people converted in Wales in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
You could point to places like John Wesley, what they call the First Great Awakening, both in England and the UK, but also in the early colonial period, where this massive conversions, big meetings, and like people just writing about this awe and awareness of God, very like much more tangible than other instances in their life.
Yeah.
Second Great Awakening through a guy like Charles Finney and through the preaching of others, where once again, like in these certain places, not everywhere, but these certain like places, these dense places where God seems to be doing something unusual. It doesn't last forever. It's like a shortened season. It seems to lift and then maybe return at another time. So it's just worth noting that there are some great books out there that chronicle these type of events. One that was given to me early in my Christian life was a guy named Wesley Duell called Revival Fire. He's actually a professor from Asbury Seminary, across the street where this Asbury revival is happening. And he tries to chronicle from the best of his knowledge as a church historian and some of the facts and some of the details. And I just remember some of my first Christian friends who I looked up to in my late high school, early college years, like they were shaped by this event called the Brownsville Revival in Florida, and they went to ministry school there. And I just remember from my early stages of Christianity, like I wanted to see something like this personally. Like I wanted to, and so I began to pray fervently for it. I mean, even at Sterling College, a Christian college, I thought maybe there's room even at our small Christian college for something like this. And I remember like waking up at like 4:30 in the morning before anybody else. Like some people were just going to bed then. And I remember like, and I'm not saying this to tout anything. Like I was just so committed to this. That seemed to be like an element of all these moves of God, like pretty desperate, extraordinary type of praying. And I remember like just giving myself to the labor of prayer and like listening to these accounts and reading these stories and sharing them with my friends. And I remember just getting some mixed results. Some people going, yeah, I'm hungering for that too. But then some of my Christian friends who I still look up to today are going, I don't know, like I have some sort of skepticism. It seems like maybe all the details shared in these stories could be exaggerated a little bit. Why isn't this happen in places where people are surely praying all the time? There seems to be a mystery there. And so I guess just over the years, I've had this interest in, is this thing genuine? Or is there a bit of an exaggeration that happens in events like this? I've certainly saw a couple different moments at Sterling College where something like this happened. I remember the day I was the chapel speaker on May the 6th in 2001. This was a long time ago, man.
Okay.
Like, what year in school were you in 2001?
That would have been 9/11, right? So I would have been in 8th grade.
Oh my gosh. I was sophomore at Sterling, and there was like, I guess, a big off-campus party called Coondog. Like, did you ever catch one of this?
No.
Maybe it was just like during my era, but like a lot of people went, and I guess there's a lot of strange activity, whatever. I just remember preaching that night or the next day after this big party on a Sunday night, and we stayed and prayed. People like came forward and prayed for hours after chapel. And I remember going, okay, like this must be something like that. I just remember there was like an awe on campus. There was like a holy hush, and if you weren't there, people were kind of talking about it. And it wasn't anything I said. I don't even remember what I said, but there was like this. There seemed like there was like an awareness. People like wanted to approach God. Maybe they were sorry for what they did the night before. I have no idea. That was one. And there was another instance when I was a senior where we had a chapel that just kind of extended for a period of time. I just remember going like, this might be something that these stories point to. It didn't last as long as this one's going on.
Yeah.
But it was definitely like something different and distinct from what we had experienced before. And so I remember being committed. I remember like, this has got to be something that the church should be pursuing. This more and more you hear about the church's story, the more you see like, okay, like these types of things happen. And we're not there at Asbury. We can't give an evaluation, analysis, what's going on there. We can only hear what's going on. We'll leave it up to them to decide. But I guess there'd be a couple things that I would say that we need to keep in mind when something like this occurs.
Okay.
Number one, on the positive side, these types of things do happen. Not only are there instances in Scripture, but there's been just so many experiences in church history where there's like an awareness of God, and you can't manufacture these things. There have been people who have tried.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Dr. Hank literally taught us in our Holy Spirit class is the Holy Spirit is elusive. We cannot project what the Spirit is going to do.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'm afraid that those who are chasing revival, they may be giving themselves to a labor that they can't quite be prepared for, because there is no guarantee that fasting and prayer at any volume is going to make this type of thing happen.
Yeah.
Because there have been scores of people who have given themselves to the endeavor of fasting and praying for revival who never experienced it.
Yeah.
Absolutely never experienced it. Because there is no formula to make God work on our behalf. Okay. In fact, there could be some hardship in a pursuit like that. So when I was in my doctoral ministry program, we were talking about like social change, and the idea of revival came up. And one of our professors remembers coming across an article about a previous Asbury College revival. So in the 70s, they had a similar type thing happen.
Okay.
And I've talked to people who were students there, and they said like that was a wonderful season of spirituality. Like they were very honest about it. In fact, some of them still got goosebumps recalling the stories. However, like one of my professors, he came across an article about the folks who were students during the 70s at this Asbury College revival, who of course got married and had kids. And if you experience something like that as a college student, like if you hear about something like that, you're going to want to go experience it again.
Yeah.
And so they would haul their families to all of these different revivals. There was one in Toronto, one in Brownsville. There was one that happened in Lakeland, Florida, not too many years ago. And so anytime there was a hint or there was a rumor of like a new revival, they would haul their families. And they actually, like this reporter actually interviewed the kids of these Asbury College students. And their conclusion was, this is devastating. They're like, we wish our parents didn't experience this revival, because our childhood has been exhausting.
Interesting.
And it's been disappointing because all the stories they told us about what they experienced, we've never had that experience ourselves.
Yeah.
And they've tried. Like they've tried to, they've been to everything.
Yeah.
And they never experienced themselves. So I guess I would say there has to be maybe some open-handedness about this. Yes, on the one hand, these types of things happen. And there's a lot of people probably in our church praying for it.
Yeah.
Okay. And we also don't need to fall into, I think, sometimes the trap of like saying, hey, revival's coming soon, revival's coming soon, revival's coming soon. And then when something happens, we say, there's proof, like it's happened. It's almost kind of like a family with an aging grandparent. Like this could be grandma's last Christmas, this could be grandma's last Christmas. And they say it for many years that it's not grandma's last Christmas. But then when grandma finally passes away, they're like, see, I told you, like, I'm so glad we made the most of it. It's like, no, you've been making the most of it for a decade now, right?
Yeah, right?
And so sometimes I feel like people are predicting things and you just can't predict it. And so I guess my only reaction to this would be something that Jonathan Edwards says. So Jonathan Edwards was a preacher in New England during the colonial period during the First Great Awakening.
Yep.
He preached the famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And when he reflected on the season of revival that they had in New England, he said this, like, this thing came without being provoked by our piety. God came on his own.
Yep.
And then God left on his own. And we were thankful. We were so grateful that we had that season to experience it together. You contrast that with a guy like Charles Finney, who wrote Lectures on Revival, who he felt like he could make revival happen in any township that he went to. Now, there's no doubt that Charles Finney experienced some great moves of God during his ministry.
Yeah.
But if you and I were like very honest, reading his Lectures on Revival, which are boring and as dry as chips to begin with, but if we were to give it an honest evaluation, we'd say, this guy believed he could make this happen. And I don't know if that's the perspective that we should ultimately have.
Yeah.
But as people who are just following Jesus and who are waiting upon God to move, I think that we should probably take more of a Edwards perspective than a Finney perspective.
That makes sense.
But I'll make this concession about Charles Finney, and I think this is something we need to look for anything that happens in regards to a revival. A true revival, according to the criterion of church historians and the biblical narrative, it should not just be an enthusiasm about spirituality. It's not just an extended time of worship.
Yeah.
It's not just big, massive crowds coming to a meeting. But in the wake of a move of God, social change happens. So you go to Acts 19, when in Ephesus, when Paul begins to preach, and there's scores of conversions. People are burning their sorcery scrolls in the streets. Okay? Massive dollar amounts of value of people, like they're making a social change. They're saying, we're no longer doing these things in religion. We're going to follow this Jesus in religion. If you continue to read that story, though, social change happens. It begins to disrupt the religious economy in Ephesus to the point where like nobody's buying the shrines from the shrine makers. Like they're going bankrupt as well. Like idolatry is losing money by the day because of the revival that's happening in Ephesus. So it does bring a social and change in posture with it. Charles Finney, when he had these revival movements break out, he was influential at Oberlin College, which still has a pretty good social justice initiative. But Charles Finney, if he knew of somebody owning slaves in their revival services, he would refuse to serve that person communion because they owned slaves. It wasn't just people are crying in response to a sermon.
Yeah.
He's like, no, we're going to make some change happen in the world around us. And that's been one of the things that people are watching at Asbury. Is there going to be some social change that happens both on campus, in their community, and then to people who are visiting and wanting to bring back whatever they're experiencing there?
Yeah.
Because if nothing happens socially, then it falls way short of what revival is. One of the things that Asbury could be looking for is, we know this from their history, they waited 10 years after the desegregation of schools to begin to admit black students into the college. And as of yet, I don't think there's been a confession of the social wrong there. Like some are saying, hey, like if this is going to be a Jesus movement, we're going to need to see some of, we expect that some stuff like this will happen in its wake because people are not just bearing their personal sins, but now we're going to embrace the fact that we've had some social sins that maybe we need to reckon with and at least apologize for from some of the things that happened in our past. So that's an element that we have to be looking for in something like this. So I guess in conclusion, I've kind of gone on a long diatribe.
No, it's good.
But in conclusion, like, should we seek revival? Absolutely, because it does lead to people's hearts being warmed, to use language that Wesley used. It leads to people thinking about spiritual things. It leads to people becoming Christian. We also need to be aware that people use like their experience in revival like a drug, like they get addicted to a experience.
Yeah.
And not connected to the God of the experience. And so we need to be saying, hey, let's look beyond just what we're experiencing in the manifestations. And let's make sure that we have a heart that's dedicated on Jesus. Yeah. And what I've heard from the Asbury Revival is like when these like big names are coming among them, like they are not getting platform time. Like this is still led by faculty and students, and they're keeping it as low key and as local as possible. So people come enjoy it. But they're not going to let some big platform ministry hijack it for their own good. Yeah. And that's been a cool thing. Yeah. Right? In the long run, is this leading to great change in the earth? Because that is the genuine article of a move of God? Does something change? And that is the narrative arc of Acts. That is a punchline for all of the major moves of God that we've seen in church history thus far.
Yeah.
So anyways, good stuff happening there. Let's keep watching it. But let's also continue to think about this phenomena and say, okay, in order for this to be a gospel-driven thing, a Jesus-centered thing, let's start to also pray for social change in the wake of all that's happening in the midst of these meetings.
Yeah.
So
That's good. I appreciate you obviously know the history of it a lot more than most of us do, so thanks for filling in those gaps. And also a couple quick things in here I think we can start to wrap up, but because of who you and I probably both follow on Twitter and Instagram, my feed's been kind of blowing up with this. A lot of people, influential people are following this, and like you said, several people are traveling there to experience it for themselves. And I guess I never really know how to view things like this. I want to believe. One of the tweets I saw was, when things like this happen, or when the words like revival get thrown around, I'd rather be a little gullible rather than be a little cynical.
That's a great way. That's perfect.
And I think that is a good posture to hold, right? So I'd rather be duped on being gullible than duped on being too cynical. That's the kind of person. I don't want to be overly cynical to the point where I don't believe anything like this could happen, right? So I think that's maybe a good posture to hold. And I was encouraged, since I've never been to Asbury, I don't know anybody there. People that I do, at least I've read their things, like Louis Giglio, I think, has been there. Jenny Allen's been there. Several people that I'm familiar with their theology, their thought process. They say that it seems to be real. It seems to be not overly hyped. I thought it was interesting. It may have changed by now, but in the early hours and days of this, Asbury University on their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they didn't even acknowledge it, which I thought was kind of strange. But then on the other hand, I wouldn't want them to hype it up too much. If they were saying, "Hey, come see this," that can go too far, right?
Yeah.
So I'm following with interest. I'm just curious to see what'll come out of it, like you said.
Yes, right. There is certainly money to be made when stuff like this happens, because visitors come, local economies boom, and then you could actually use it, leverage it to sell stuff to private platforms, and they're refusing to do so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually in the DNA of Asbury itself. So when I was shopping seminaries back in the day, I went to Asbury because at that time I was a United Methodist churchgoer. That's a good place for Methodist clergy to get their seminary training. And there was a neat vibe of that campus. It was very low key, but you could tell people had a heart towards God, a very kind, very simple. I mean, it wasn't perfect, obviously. But it comes back to John Wesley, who's one of the founders of Methodism. He was an unassuming guy. He wasn't a perfect person. He didn't require a lot for his own life. And he had this neat posture. I think I've talked about it before, but he had this neat posture about even his own money. He started ministry making little, and he wanted to always live on that. So whenever he increased in his personal wealth, he gave most of it away.
Yeah.
And to the point where he said, if I've got more than this amount, when I die, call me a liar. And that I didn't live by my values. Yeah. So I think that's in the DNA too. It's a very humble place. And I just think it's neat. So we'll see. I mean, I saw a tweet last night. Some student, when they went to the evening meetings, could not recognize a single person in the main auditorium. So now, it really has gone to this next phase of people from all over are there, probably outnumbering the students who are willing to engage.
Right.
And so it's interesting to see what's going to happen from here.
Yeah.
And once again, hear me out. I haven't been there. I have no idea what's going on.
Right.
We can only hear messages from the frontier. In general, these things are messy. Good things happen. I think some unfortunate things happen. So we'll just see where this thing goes. I mean, news will break at some point. They're not going to continue to meet for 24/7.
Yeah.
For the next 10 years, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But for the time being, they're embracing it, they're enjoying it, and what I'm praying for more than anything else is just profound life change, and social change on the wake of something like this. And it should be an inspiring thing for all of us to pursue those things as well. personal change, social change in the world around us.
Yeah, that's good. We'll keep an eye on it. Of course, we want good things like this to happen, right?
Yeah.
We, like you said, we can't control where God shows up, but whenever he does, we want to be aware of that, right? And follow whatever comes out of it. So we'll continue to follow this story as it develops.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was great. Thanks for all the historical context there, Joe. So this Sunday we're starting a new sermon series. We got to wrap up here really quickly, but it's kind of a big deal. Do you want to give a quick preview of Sunday?
Yeah, so we're doing a discipleship sermon series starting this week. It's a 6-part series called Who Am I Becoming? Our wager is that when we become Christian, like we start turning into something new. Paul says we become a new creation. And so what does that mean, though? Like we have to define what can we look for, what can we watch for in those changes. And so this is a 6-week series where the sermons and some small group curriculum are going to be available so that our sermons and our groups can be talking about the same thing. So there is a website, whomibecoming.org. It's going to host all the material necessary. So if you're in a group or you're not in a group, you get all the goods there. Yep. But we're asking some of our Sunday schools and our life groups to consider using it for the next 6 weeks, and we've got a great response. Yep. We've even got like Sunday schools combining for this 6-week series to do it together. And so if you're in one of those classes or groups, you're going to be engaging in that stuff together. But for the next 6 weeks, we're going to have this one conversation in group life and on Sunday mornings, and I'm looking forward to it. But it's all out there. About midweek, we're going to have an extra podcast. It's going to be hosted on our podcast stream. It's going to be an audio version of the lesson. So if you're not in one of those groups, or if you miss that group time, or if you just don't like reading, be like taking in a podcast instead, it's going to be an audio version. And so I encourage you, go to the website, come on Sunday morning, get in the group life, and it's going to be a cool thing to talk about together for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We've been working on it for a long time. I'm ready for it to finally get out there so you guys can all experience it. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, and hat tip to Matt and his team. They've been like really carrying a lot of water for this. So
all of us. It's been a huge effort for a lot of people, so it'll be good. Yeah. Whomibecoming.org, and we hope to see you on Sundays as we kick it off.
Yep, sounds good. All right.
Thanks for watching. We'll hope to see you Sunday.
Yeah, see you next time.
See ya.